Okay, so we're live. Yeah, hey, welcome guys for the weekly Tokenomics and DACs EOS Ignite series. Have kind of everybody who spoke at the EOS Ignite conference, about a month or two ago, and have also been guests. So we have Luke Stokes from eosDAC. We have Haley Thompson from EOS Cafe, and then Justin from EOS Blocksmith now. So really appreciate you guys joining us, and you guys can hear and see me okay, right? I hope my internet is okay. But yeah, let's get started. I guess this is just our weekly chat about the latest we were really talking about DACs the last couple of weeks, so we could probably continue the conversation on that topic. And we could, that's the plan, just to talk about DACs and tokenomics. And we had Luke kind of share all his insights last week. So maybe we just start with that, since I know he mentioned, Luke, you mentioned something in the Telegram about having some kind of questions about what you were planning for eosDAC. So maybe we can start with that, and then if anybody else, maybe think about other kind of topics that you want to talk about today, and we can just go from there. So
yeah, that'd be great. I have to write a post about this to kind of get the community discussions going on. I thought, oh, well, what better place to start the conversation than with a group of people that are passionate about DACs. So it's a very eosDAC specific thing, but I think it's an interesting conversation related to DAC governance and how we, figure these things out. So so yeah, I'm going to do a post about it anyway, but I figured it'd be cool to talk about it. And then I may have to jump out and actually get to some work. So I'm just going to jump in and listen. But yeah, if we could start the conversation, just a little background. We are really, really close to launching the DAC as a completely on-chain system, meaning you register your profile, you set up, you kind of register as a candidate to be a custodian, and then you go in and vote for custodians. And part of our constitution for eosDAC that you stake, well, it's part of our nomination kind of initiative. You have to stake a certain number of eosDAC tokens to be a custodian. And the idea behind that is, if you've read the book Skin in the Game, it's the idea that you want to have some kind of skin in the game because you want to be incentivized to be a good actor and help the community, help the DAC, provide value, all that kind of stuff. So there's two in our smart contract code that we've written. There are two parameters that we have to kind of agree on. And that's one, how many tokens should be staked and how long should they be staked for? So before I go on further, does that kind of make sense what we're talking about here? It's like, you want to be, someone who has influence, you're going to be one of 12, every 7 days, the custodians are voted in based on the voting of the token holders. And then they fill a 7-day term, and their responsibilities include agreeing on worker proposals, essentially deciding how the money of the DAC gets spent. So it's a pretty important position, and they have important decisions to make. So we want to make sure we get really intelligent, good actors, people that are, passionate about the long-term success of the DAC. So as we started talking about this, it raises an interesting challenge, because you want it to be enough money that people care. And when we even talk about money, we have to think about, do we talk about purchasing power? Do we talk about, can it just be an eosDAC token number irregardless of the current token price? These are all the things we're kind of evaluating, and we don't want to make it such a high bar that not anyone can participate. So it would be like a, rich guys only club or something like that. That's not what we're going for, obviously. But at the same time, it has to be enough that it even matters, right? Like if it's $10 or $50, like who cares? You're like, well, sweet, I can vote up all my custodian friends and we can roll in, and, even though it's a multi-sig contract on the funds, we just roll in and take all the funds, right? Well, this would be bad. And it wouldn't, so they lose their stake. They don't care because they just made a whole bunch of money stealing from the DAC. So these are the kind of things that, I was kind of playing around with, and I want to start opening the discussion with not only the eosDAC community, but the larger community. And if any of you know anyone who ever had EOS in April, they may have eosDAC as well. So it's a relevant conversation to pretty much everyone in the EOS ecosystem if they're interested in supporting an EOS, like a DAC initiative on EOS, which is what we're doing. So yeah, I'd love to talk about that. What are you guys' thoughts? I mean, my kind of rough back of the envelope math was like maybe $1,000 US in eosDAC tokens, which would be about 50 grand, 50,000 tokens at the current, two penny price. But, it's really just kind of a random number. It's very arbitrary. And then also too, for the amount of lockup time, Some of us were talking about 6 months. Some of us were talking about 3 months, because 6 months is like multiple lifetimes in the cryptocurrency space. So that's a long time. If you even decide like, and that starts from the moment you are no longer a custodian, because we want to keep track of like, well, what damage did you cause while you were a custodian, and how long is it going to take us to figure out that potential damage? And then that started another conversation of like, can you even cause damage as an individual? I mean, I could go out there and say whatever, but I don't represent the DAC. I'm just one person, right? Even if I was a custodian. So even then, it's like only on chain is the only thing that a custodian can do, and alone they can't do anything. So there's only like, you know, brand problems, whatever. So anyway, that's a whole lot to say. There's some stuff we could chew on and talk about as far as DAC governance. And I know it's specific to eosDAC and what we're doing, but I hear a lot from the community that they're excited about this project and they want to, you know, help and be encouraged by it and learn from it. So hopefully it'll be a fun conversation.
Cool. Can I just ask a question to start off with?
Yeah.
So these 12 custodians, do they have specific roles, or do they just vote together to kind of decide how to spend money?
We actually have a post that I one of my things I need to get to is there's a draft of a document completely outlining the kind of expectations of an eosDAC custodian. So I haven't even looked at that yet. It's got a tab open right there. I need to get to it. But my understanding is, if I was to kind of summarize it, their primary role is to make all the decisions for the DAC related to, like, say, we have to make a code update to the contracts. You know, that's a multi-sig transaction. We have to agree on whether we're going to support, you know, an initiative. Well, that would be done as a worker proposal, and then the custodians would then vote yes or no on that worker proposal. And so our worker proposal system right now is up and running, but it's done through basically an Excel spreadsheet, and we have our Genesis custodians that are kind of managing that right now. But very, very soon this is going to be completely on chain. So it's primarily deciding which worker proposals get funded and which ones don't. So yeah.
And who?
So they also have the key to the kingdom too. Like all that money is there that they essentially could control.
So if a custodian was to lose their skin in the game, who makes that decision? Is that the other custodians, or is that the token holders themselves?
That's a really good question that is somewhat undefined, because the Constitution, we have a nice 20-page Constitution that breaks down a lot of this stuff. And I really think it's going to be a great model for a lot of DACs going forward. I mean, Beehive Collective, some others have already just copied it and replaced eosDAC with their company name, you know, because they recognize that we're kind of paving some new territory here. But it's kind of leaves it up to, I think it's called the nomination directive. So it's kind of like the Ricardian contract, whatever that says that the custodians agree to, that's what we're going to enforce essentially. So I'm a little uncomfortable that that's not yet defined. Like, what would be an action that collectively the community would agree, that guy screwed us and we need to hold their stake, right? That's, you know, not super clear, you know? And so these are the type of things that are going to have to be decided. And ultimately, it really always comes down to the custodians. They get those 7 days to act as representatives of the token holders. And if they do something that, or if they even signal that they're going to do something that token holders don't like, then they can vote other people in. And then too, there's like, you can have an extraordinary resolution or a special resolution where custodians can actually be fired. Like the other, if you have a whole bunch of custodians that look and say, this guy here, this guy is totally a bad actor, and I cannot represent my token holders unless I remove this guy. You know, they have a mechanism to do that. And you can actually fire a custodian, which is pretty scary to think about, you know, but ultimately the point of that is to best represent the token holders. Now, obviously, if a bunch of custodians did that, then the token holders didn't agree, then they'd all get unvoted and removed. So that's kind of the idea behind the idea.
Right.
So it's a lot of people have been talking about DACs for a long time. I mean, I've been in crypto for more than 5 years, and this concept of DACs has been at least 3 years, been a topic of much discussion. So I feel like we're now, rubber hits the road. Like we're actually doing it now. We're building the thing, and it's going to take a lot of people's insight to make it right.
Yeah, no, these systems are really cool. And there's so many angles on them. You can build something with the best of intentions, and then something you never expected can kind of come out of it, right? So it is cool. Like you said, the rubber hits the road now. So yeah, really got to put your mind to it.
So I'll chime in here. So your system has 12 custodians, right? Mm-hmm. And how much does the treasury build up? So it's voted in every week. Did you just mention? Is it?
Yeah, every 7 days, basically, the code looks at, it kind of takes a snapshot of the current voting and it moves it all to another table. And then that table is what we run the next 7 days off of. So that it just takes the top 12 and be like, boom, there's your custodians. And then it automatically updates the permissions on the multi-sig. So all the funds, all the contracts themselves, this is another big point that, oh my gosh, I really want more people in the EOS ecosystem to understand. If you use a token and you don't know who controls the private key for that token, you are completely trusting one person potentially to manage potentially millions or even billions of dollars in value. Super scary. So the way we're doing things is everything's going to be done through those custodians. And I think that even that one little piece will be hugely valuable to almost every token that gets out on the EOS blockchain. Is they're going to recognize the value and the trust perception of saying, we've got a board of people who get to influence who their membership is, that get to control the kind of mutability of your funds. And ultimately, yes, you could burn your private keys and just be like, this contract's locked in forever. But I haven't seen anybody do that yet.
Cool to stress that point for sure, that we are actually trusting people, and it's there's certain parts that are trustless, or at least trust minimized. But really, when it comes down to who holds the key of any kind of organization or DAC is really just usually just one person, right? So, unless you set it up like eosDAC does with multi-sig. So the question was, okay, so you wanted to know like how long you should stake, and then what the stake should be, right, for this. Mm. And so just as a reference, I always just look at like what amount is at risk in the treasury at any given point in time. And then you divide it by 12, it's just how many custodians you have, right? And so if you're distributing the funds like every week and it doesn't accumulate too much, you might not need as much.
I got you. Yeah, no, we have in our constitution a requirement of 6 months operating funds, and we're not going to go into debt to have that liability, for our users. So it is going to be a good amount of money. Now we have money in with InfoComSec. We have like our service provider that deals with fiat has fiat money, and then we've got our on-chain blockchain money. Now the custodians, they could ask the service provider to do something, but if they were bad actors, the service provider could be like, no. And, we could fork all the code and launch some new DAC if we wanted to. Same with the block production services that are provided, that kind of stuff. But as it relates to the actual money on chain, that's the money that could be transferred right away. Now, what's really cool, Michael Yates is doing a great job building out time delay functionality along with Dallas into that. So even your payments will be time delayed, probably by 24 hours is what we're looking at. So that way, if somebody rolls in and is like, boom, 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 we're going to change this up, we can be like, whoa, hey, that's like, you're just draining the funds of the account. That's not cool. But your point is a good one as far as like relating the risk, a good bond, a good insurance kind of bond would somewhat relate to the potential probabilistic outcome of this amount of money getting stolen, right? Or the other way to look at it is if you could create like a legal situation. Like what if you did something terrible as a group of custodians that now nation state governments are like coming after you? Like, I don't even want to list some of them because they're just bad, but we're talking about some of these terrible things that could be done through the worker proposal system. And, if you have governments coming after you and you start getting sued by individuals or whatever, the costs of that would be huge. And so we wouldn't be able to cover that with just the stake tokens, right? Unless we made it ridiculously high. It's not going to be like $50,000 or something like that in purchasing power to be a custodian. So these are all things we're trying to figure out, and again, these are difficult conversations that nobody really has good answers for because we have precedents to look at and be like, well, we could just look at the last 20 years of DACs. There's no history. We are the history, right? We're building it now. And we're actually, I'm really proud of what eosDAC is doing. It's the reason I'm on this team is because, it's the reason I'm participating in this community. I don't even like to say team because there is no team. It's just a set of worker proposals and whoever's active, right? But it's just because we are kind of pioneering what's possible with this technology, with blockchain technology. And I really do think a lot of systems are going to be improved to increase human well-being going forward because of what we're doing now.
Yeah. The problem I see is no matter how much money is at stake, like say it was 50 grand, the amount of damage that they could actually make is much, much more substantial than that. Yeah. So I feel like I'm not sure this would be the correct way I suppose you talked about some other methods that would prevent the damage, and I feel that those are probably stronger methods, like having a delay on when payments can be made, so people
Oh,
could jump
absolutely.
in
Yeah.
and
We're
throw those
doing all
out.
that. Yeah. We're doing all that on top of, it's
Yeah,
still, it's also almost a signal to the
yeah,
voters to say, like, this person put, let's say, $1,000 of their own money and they agreed to lock it up for 6 months. It's just a way to say, look, I'm serious. I'm not just goofing around. I'm not going to just show up and then, not be a valuable actor in this space. But you're right. It's really kind of, that's all it is. It's a token gesture, right? So, but then,
exactly.
do you make it $50? Do you make it $100? Like, how do you then, if it's just a token gesture, ultimately, right? Like,
Could this bond be part of the campaign? So could I, if I really, really want to be a custodian and I kind of put my money where my mouth is and say, look, I'm willing to put up $100,000 of my own money. This is how much I believe in it.
Yes.
Whereas someone else who's more established, or maybe they're from a nation that they're not that wealthy, but they really believe in it, says, look, $50 might not seem like a lot, but it's a lot to me. And then it's just part of the campaign.
I totally agree. And in the actually, you can look at it right now if you want to go to members-dev.eosDAC.io, and on Jungle Testnet, you could totally play with the entire interface that we're about to launch in production. And it has exactly that. They're open input fields. There's two fields. One is how much you're going to stake, and the other is your pay, which is an interesting aspect of it. There's actually kind of a game theory dynamic that happens where everyone says, I'd like to be paid this much a week as a custodian, and then I think we take the median or the average. So it's like, that's also part of you're saying, I don't need to be paid that much, but I'm going to provide a lot of value. But yeah, I think what we're trying to figure out is kind of the suggested minimums for that. And also I think we have a maximum of like 250 EOS a week. And we're like, we never expect anyone to get even close to that maximum. That's way too much money. But just, we have to set some default somewhere, right? And we don't want to be the guys that kind of decide all this. And the cool thing about this being on the EOS blockchain is no matter what we decide, the code can be changed. The custodians can decide they want to change it, and then they go ahead and change it. But yeah, I'm just kind of looking for input and feedback from people who are passionate about DACs and this governance type stuff. What are sane defaults? And that's an interesting argument, is that maybe there shouldn't be a minimum on the staking amount. And then you're just kind of like, why vote for that guy? He only put $50 and he's not really serious, or that girl, whatever. Yeah, that's an interesting point.
Could the voters actually stake an amount for the constitutional member, and then it would build up to a much more significant amount if people have to put their own funds behind who they're voting?
There has been a lot of debate about stake-weighted voting versus just free voting. There's some on the team that are passionate, like, we need staking. We absolutely have to have staking. And other people are kind of like, what's the point? Because it's a calendar-based 7-day. We just, at that moment, we know how many tokens you had, so you could buy the tokens, vote, and sell the tokens a second later. But really just matters that at that moment, you decided what you're going to do. But it's a good question. Staking is an interesting aspect of the cryptocurrency space that kind of proves that you care, right? That you've locked up some tokens. I've got Karma tokens I've staked. I've got other tokens I've staked where it's just like I'm not just here to sell all my tokens and move on to something else.
I guess the one negative to that would be is if you have to stake on behalf of one of these candidates, that's a risk, and that might be a disincentive for actually doing the voting and staking in the first place. So then, I don't know, do you need to give them an interest reward for successful candidates? I don't know. Yeah,
these are challenging things. And a lot of people, the initial launch of eosDAC talked about the potential for, in the future, if there's revenue that's significant of this DAC concept, this DAC enabler that we're building, that would be distributed to the owners of the DAC if agreed to by the custodians and the members. And that's still something that's on the table as an option. Obviously, as an entrepreneur, business person myself, I think that would be kind of silly to do right now. As a startup, get rid of your funds right in the way. You spend a few years kind of building up your value for the marketplace, and then later, you start thinking about profit distribution, stuff like that. But yeah, it's a tricky subject, because you also, then you start getting into incentivizing voting. And if you incentivize voting, like you're going to get bad votes. Then you just get noise. You don't get any signal. People should vote because they care about the future and their own stake, their own tokens. They want to see those tokens go up in value in the future. So these are complicated things. I appreciate talking to people who care about talking about it.
Do we have any other maybe comments in the audience here about this conversation? Or Haley or Justin, any other ideas? Oh, Haley, I think you're might.
Sorry. Yeah, on mute. When we were talking about like a $50,000 level, like one thing that popped into my head, if I was running and I wanted to post that much, I'd be worried about like a shoot the messenger problem. Like let's say something bad happened to eosDAC or crypto, and it was really out of the hands of the custodians, but like that's why part of why I asked, is it the token holders who decide? Because the last thing you'd want is to like to do everything in your power and everything you could to be a good custodian. Something external happens, the token holders are upset and they lash out by removing your bond. And I'm sure if politicians had bonds, this would happen all the time.
Yes.
Just like get rid of it, right? So
yeah. No, it's a good point. Like to your point, yes, to your question, it is the custodians have all the control. And that's the way that we've designed our DAC, because otherwise I think you get either voter apathy, where it's like, you're trying to get something done and, you're trying to get just like herding cats, right? No one's going to get alignment in the right direction to actually accomplish anything. And at the same time, you don't want to have this kind of like, tyranny of the majority, this kind of democracy kind of system where it's like two wolves and a sheep deciding what to have for dinner. Like, it's not a good plan, right? You want to generally do what's best for everyone with a long-term vision. So yeah, the custodians are the one that decide that. That said, again, there are kind of like extraordinary situations. I mean, it's all detailed in the Constitution of what could be done if you do have bad actors trying to attack the DAC. And these are things we're going to figure out. And to your point too about the liability potential on the actual custodians is a really big deal. And as much as we've tried to protect the members and the custodians in our Constitution, there are still open questions because there's no precedent for how this is going to be handled. You've got individual contract law and you've got limited liability corporation law, and we're kind of this new thing that we're yet to know what's going to be.
Yeah, no, the legalities are fascinating because there's no place to put a DAC. Yeah.
So let's see. Is there anything else that people were saying? Ray Dalio. Justin talks about Ray Dalio and his reputation weighted voting system. Believability weighted voting is what he calls it. If you have that video, I found that interesting. And
someone was just talking about Ray Dalio earlier today in a conversation I was in. I think reputation is huge in terms of liquid democracy, being able to set a proxy and someone you trust on specific categories to say like, this person I know is going to make a good decision on this particular issue. I may not agree with him on this issue, but on this issue, I really trust their expertise and their reputation. And I think that relates to kind of having provable identity. So another thing that we have as part of our Constitution or our nomination process for a custodian candidate is you set up a profile and you get to like put in your social media links and a picture of your face and all that kind of stuff, with the hope that people are going to actually stake their reputation on this process and not just be anonymous.
Yeah. I was wondering, right now, do you have kind of whales of the eosDAC ecosystem who could just instill a puppet or someone they want to be in eosDAC as a constitutional member? Is that a problem at the moment?
It certainly could be. Here, I'm going to drop a link in here. This is our Token Explorer. And also, too, I want to remind everybody, like, everything we build is open source for eosDAC. So, like, any other token projects that you guys are involved in on EOS, and they're like, hey, we'd like to have a Token Explorer. Well, here you go. Like, just change the styles, change the logo, fork the repo. You can have your own Token Explorer. I think we're one of the first, like, dedicated token explorers for an EOS token. But anyway, that said, if you click on the little green top 100 chart, you can kind of see a little chart, outline. There's somebody has 100 million tokens. Someone else has 84 million tokens. Somebody else has 58 million. So there are definitely eosDAC whales. One of the things we put in our system is that you can only vote for 5 custodians. So unlike the process that EOS has, where you have 20 custodians, but you can vote for 30. And there's even discussion of maybe extending that to 50 or more. This is kind of a little bit of a different approach. And I think the thinking behind that was to hopefully prevent some of what you're talking about. That if you wanted to vote for more than 5, you would have to split up your tokens and have multiple accounts.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's always the token distribution problem is like the #1 problem I see over and over and over again with every cryptocurrency project I've ever been involved in. It's like, how do you, especially if it's a governance token, like in delegated proof of stake or even, BitShares, Smart Cash, Dash, anywhere where you're voting with your tokens for any type of governance, whether it's paying out proposals or what, the distribution is a challenge.
And so just, I guess the distribution is pretty similar to EOS, right? With eosDAC, with maybe Block One, I assume has.
We actually didn't distribute to Block One. We were really careful, and we had a dialogue with them, and they agreed that it wouldn't make sense. We didn't distribute to exchanges that weren't going to support transferring those tokens directly to their users. So there were a whole number of exchanges that had EOS but didn't get eosDAC. We tried to make it fair as best we could. And also too, part of the benefit of doing that back in April when it was still on the Ethereum chain is it kind of gave people the opportunity to decide whether or not they wanted to be involved in a DAC concept or not. So I think the distribution of the tokens has kind of gone different directions. So hopefully that means the people that own the eosDAC token are actually passionate about DACs. And it may be a separate group than people who just own EOS.
Yeah. Real quick, the Ray Dalio video, you should definitely check it out if you haven't. It's a TED Talk and thanks Justin for posting that. I just definitely check that out. It's a very fascinating TED Talk. So there's another question. What do you think about Telos's distribution process? I guess anyone have comments on that? Hey, Justin, I think you probably have a good.
Yeah, personally, I think it's a great kind of distribution method. So specifically, he's talking about the 1-to-1 with the 40K cap. Yeah, I think it really helps to not have those massive whales. But yeah, we'll see what happens in that case because people could always buy up later. There's a theory though that after kind of there's a live marketplace, it'll be a lot harder to actually buy up kind of 1 million tokens because as someone starts to buy into the market, there'll only be so much on a supply at any given time. So they'll be buying into the market, and with that limited supply, the price will just escalate just astronomically. And so it will make it very, very difficult in a normal marketplace to actually build up a huge stake really quickly. They might be able to build it over time, but they certainly won't be able to do it in the first month of the Telos launch.
It's if there's anything that I'm kind of proud of in the crypto space in EOS is the idea that got branded the fair drop by Karma. It was one of the contributions I brought to their team. So I'm like, what if we put a cap on how much that we just airdropped on a bunch of people so you would limit this kind of whale behavior right off the bat? And they love that idea, and they branded it well as a fair drop. And it's kind of neat to see Telos doing essentially the same thing, just putting a cap on the amount that, just to make the distribution start a little bit more evenly. Now, the fun part, the more philosophical question to ask is, no matter what, will it always hit the Pareto principle of 80-20? Will it just always eventually get back to the position where 20% of the people control 80% of the power? And I've yet to see an example in the real world where that doesn't happen. It's almost freaky how fractal things are and how these type of patterns show up over and over and over again. And so I sometimes kind of go back and forth about whether or not it's even worth fighting nature, if that's really what it is. And at some point, just recognize, let's just be careful about who we get in the 20, right? who those 20% are. And then also the bad actors that do eventually find their way into that small group of powerful people, how do we prevent them from causing harm for the whole network?
Yeah. It's a hard thing to fight. Like Telos is very interesting. And I think this is what we're going to see in EOS, instead of forks, we're just going to see side chains, and they're almost like different experiments. The thing about is like whales, there's a lot of talk about bad actor whales, but the thing is whales are the reason that EOS has a $4 billion market cap, which is they're the reason that being a block producer, we're all members of a block producer. It's the reason that we can keep the lights on is the value of the token, which is supported by the market cap. And, if we don't have whales who believe in the project, we don't have that market cap, right? And so if I was a whale and I got capped at 40K at Telos, there's no way I'm accumulating that token. They capped me. They don't want my involvement. They don't believe in my kind of, they don't like believe that I'm supporting their ecosystem. So I'm not going to support their ecosystem. And I would, so I believe that everyone should experiment. We should do all these experiments, like the discussion about the URI, hopefully there's a URI chain, and that kind of fights the Pareto principle where you redistribute the wealth But it's all experiments. But who's going to like support the price if you don't have these whales who really believe in the project? To be a block producer on Telos, you need that token to be worth the trouble of running those nodes. They're not cheap to run. The hardware is not cheap to buy. So it's like, I think it's going to be really interesting to see is like, will they have a token price that kind of supports being a BP on that system?
Yeah, I've spent the last couple of months really thinking a lot about financial value itself and the philosophy behind it. How do we come up with? And there's been discussions about the cost of mining a Bitcoin, the cost of pulling gold out of the ground, all these different. And I'm currently at the place where I just think it's, and this relates a lot to tokenomics, the concept. It's like a fundamental principle that tokenomics I think relies on is how do human beings define financial value? And I'm currently in a place to just say it's all storytelling. It's like whatever we agree to. It's like a bunch of people just get together and be like, do you believe that? Do you believe that? I kind of believe that. Okay, let's go with that. Like that's ultimately all it is. And it's funny because I've been playing with this a bit with EOS Nights. I've been playing on EOS Nights because it's a fun example of an economy that's somewhat evolving where like, a piece of titanium, I sold one for 1 EOS a while back. And now it's like, 0.05 or, but then they just recently, a couple of days ago, introduced a new concept of like a set of these new things that use a lot of titanium. And all of a sudden the price of titanium goes back up again. It's just like, it's hilarious to me that we can understand human psychology using economics as a proxy for that whole, how do people value anything? And yeah, the idea of like toying with these experiments, like games like EOS Nights, is just hilarious to me because it connects into real value. Like that EOS is real. You can buy stuff with it,
I've been really enjoying EOS Nights because it like there's all these game marketplaces that have existed for decades, but this one is actually very, very linked to the real world. And I mean, I think there's guys who are making a profit off it because they might just sit there and slowly hunt and peck the 3 inputs rather cheaply, knowing that they'll craft an item and that's just their effort, and it's a whole new marketplace tied to EOS. It is really cool, but it's only because people agree that item has value. It's just a bunch of pixels. So it's.
And then related to that too, they just changed the minimum bid price. It used to be 0.0, I think it was 0.001 or 0.01, and now it's 0.005. So that immediately the marketplace just radically changed because everyone went in and they said, well, I'll just make it cheaper because I really want to sell it and make some EOS. So that also is hilarious to me because I've been studying central banking since going all the way back to the late 1700s and thinking about how these market economies function and how they don't function when they're in controlled systems where and that's what we see with something like EOS Nights because ultimately they're recognizing that the economy wasn't working perfectly. Like you had to change some things to keep the experiment going. So it's just so fun to learn from these things and figure out what we could do better. It's fascinating.
I think Haley made an awesome point there. I don't think whales are inherently bad actors. Like the fact that they become whales in the first place is a recognition of their ability to recognize value and assign them money, their actual money to that, whatever it is, a token, a stock, a company. And they become bigger because as a reward for them properly recognizing economic value, that people only later found out this is actually a valuable thing, and then the price goes up. So I think we always need a method for, people to kind of increase their ability to make decisions in the world, whatever world that is, whether it's a tokenomic system or a company. If they're recognized as a good decision maker, they'll grow their value. I guess we do need to improve the way it works though, because at the moment, if you get in early and you kind of invest in something or are the early founder, it's just a case of you kind of permanently hold a huge stake in that. And, you could go away and stop working on it. And, you're still this massive, massive whale. I feel that, yeah, and we spoke about it in the first session, maybe having a higher inflation rate on kind of an economic system is the way that someone can be both rewarded for recognizing value early and still kind of accruing an increase in value, but also allow a greater distribution of wealth for people to add to that economic system over time, over sort of many years. So yeah, I'm sort of mixed about that.
Yeah, and recent events, they kind of call it into question, right? I was even I'm kind of reevaluating. It's like I never thought that the people with the most at stake would ever act the way they've allegedly acted. So like, and it's all just a big experiment, and we just kind of, that's why I think side chains make all the sense in the world, because if we need to tweak something, and as a community we can't agree that to tweak it in our, in this chain, another chain can come and say, we've done it this way. And maybe that is the successful model. Maybe Telos is a successful model. And I think there'll be tons of different chains that are going to try their hand. I think there'll be ones without a worker proposal fund, ones with a worker proposal fund. We live in very interesting times. It's pretty cool to be part of it.
If you guys will permit me, can I drop another link? I'm going to link here to our DAC chain initiative, because related to exactly what you just said, that's, I think, what we're hoping to do is launch a chain that is essentially a test network for testing out what works best for DACs. I don't know that we got to talk about this much on the last time we got together, but the idea of, and we have a website that is almost ready to be launched, and a whole kind of deep explanation of what we're doing. But essentially, we need to be able to try a whole lot of different experiments to figure out what works and what doesn't. And the only way I know to do that is through free market expression. Like open source technology is a great example of that, where people just, if they don't like it, they fork it and they do something better. And it's basically a way to encapsulate the network effect of value. The more people are involved, the more value the system has. And so DAC chain initiative is a way to say, okay, what if we tweak some of these? Like, for example, what if we made the Constitution an actual contract? We couldn't even interact on the chain unless you agree to the Constitution, which is what we've done with eosDAC. What if we, change the RAM situation so that RAM is much, much cheaper? What if we didn't, adjusted the Banco algorithm differently, or whatever the situation might be? What if, just start asking these questions about how we might be able to tweak the way the software is implemented? What if every transaction had a time delay, so that people's funds would be protected, and there's be some confidence that no matter what you did, you'd have time to know if you got taken advantage of, that kind of thing. So these are all kind of the ideas that we're floating around, and I think it's going to take not only us but a lot of people just exploring this technology and what it's useful for, and what how it can be improved. And it's a little bit difficult to do that with $5 billion on the line, right? It's a little easier on a testnet, someplace where you're just exploring new ideas.
But the skin in the game, it's interesting that you said that, because the first thing I thought is, like, you put me on a testnet, I'm just going to game it. In fact, I had a friend who was really into online poker, and he was saying dude, if you go into the penny games,
they're no fun.
Yeah. Or because people just they'll go all in on nothing because
and they'll win
and they'll win. But if you try to play that way in the $10 hand games, you get roasted, because the skin is it's more real, and everyone acts differently. So that's kind of why you need some type of skin in the game for these sandboxes to work. Otherwise, it's just I can game the system. I'm going to game it because it's fun. But if I have stake, it's I'm not going to game the system even if I could, because that'll hurt the price of the token.
As Justin just mentioned, though, it's a good point that, and I like to play poker too. I haven't played in a while because I've been so focused on cryptocurrency stuff, but I used to play some Texas Hold'em, had a regular game going, and I'm a grinder. So it's just as just like Justin was saying, you can game the people who are playing that way. You're like, oh, you took the money. Oh, you took the money. And then all of a sudden you're just boom. And now you're out of the game. It's so it's just, we can actually adjust our game theory dynamics if we understand the level of skin in the game someone has. So when I say testnet, it's kind of tongue in cheek in that it is going to be a real chain. It may support the governance pieces of what somebody wants to do on a DAC without having kind of the speculative value of the token maybe. I mean, these are the kind of things we're exploring, but I don't know that it's going to be a completely, it's not going to be like JungleNet, right? Like in terms of test network. So it'll be what it ends up being ultimately. But I do think that there's going to be some level of value in a governance token, a utility token, to define decision-making process on some other entity that is a real valued entity. You know, at some point people will say, wait, so I have to have X number of tokens in governance to be able to have my influence? Well, okay, however I obtain those tokens, I'm going to go do that.
Yeah, no, it'd be really cool for the DAC model with good tokenomics to just kind of take over, you know, like being in non-government organizations, like everyone just being like, wait a minute, this is a better way to do things. This is going to cut out nepotism. This is going to cut out grift. We're all going to be accountable. Like that's what I would really like to see. And we're, you know, if we're on the front lines, right? And eosDAC especially is blazing the trail. Building. Man,
I could have done a better pitch myself. You know, just go vote for us. No, I completely agree. That's why I'm involved in this. But it's hard. It's difficult stuff.
Yeah, it's a cool challenge.
So will this new chain?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, will this new chain compete one-to-one with EOS for like dApps launching on it, or is it? I don't
think so. No, I think it's going to be completely specific to what features it provides that are beneficial to anyone launching a dApp or a DAC or anything. And if there's something that really truly is valuable that we kind of discover as we're tinkering with stuff, ultimately, I expect that code to be directly back into eosIO. You know, that's, I mean, our constitution as a DAC even makes that very clear that we are supporting the eosIO infrastructure and mainnet and everything. So I would hope that we do discover something super valuable that all of a sudden everyone starts using and going, hey, whoever's coding on eosIO, you better implement this pull request because dang, this is working and this is what we're missing and this is what isn't working for us, that kind of a deal. That's my hope. Yeah. And I again, I have no interest in, I'm involved in multiple cryptocurrencies. I'm a witness on Steam. I'm wearing a BitShares t-shirt, just happened to be the shirt I had on. Like, I don't play the whole like, you know, tribalistic cryptocurrency game. I think we all learn from each other. Most of these projects are open source. We have so much to learn from each other that there's no benefit in doing the walled garden kind of thing. So I would hope that eosDAC, you know, the DAC initiative, DAC chain, and EOS, and any other system would all benefit from each other.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think there's no point in being restrictive about kind of people forking out and trying new things, because it's going to get us to the end destination sooner, I feel, the more experiments, because the reality is EOS itself is just an experiment that we don't know will fully work. It's shown that it has a lot of promise so far, and it's doing a lot of things better than we've been able to do in the centralized world, but there's always room for improvement. And that's why I think chains like Telos and Warbly and eosDAC chain, they're great.
We had a cool question. It might have been June's question 2 weeks ago. I'd like to hear, Luke, I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. Is EOS itself a DAC?
Yeah, that was a fascinating conversation. And I think what I love about that is like nobody defines the autonomous part, right? Like however we do the C, whether it's corporation, community, you know, company, whatever, or O if it's DAO, what's the A, right? That's an interesting thing, because I mean, smarter people than us, like Vitalik and others, have written amazing posts on this, you know, of what that is. My personal opinion is that it's more of a DAC than a lot of other cryptocurrency projects out there, and I say that because the actual governance is done in smart contracts, and that is when I read the Wikipedia page for what a DAC is, it talks about smart contracts as being a core part of that the system itself runs autonomously, meaning it runs without human interaction on a blockchain. As long as the blockchain exists, it's going to continue functioning. All the humans removed, it's still functioning, you know, that kind of a deal. So I look at EOS as having that mechanism via the contracts that allow for block production and voting for block producers and, you know, all that kind of stuff, staking, unstaking, everything like that. It's all done somewhat on chain and autonomously. So I would say, yeah, it's one of the best candidates for being a real DAC out there. I've heard arguments that Bitcoin could be considered that as well, just mainly due to the nature of how it launched. You know, there isn't like a central organization that controls, you know, that. But then you get the question of like, well, what about the GitHub repo? You know, the code itself, if that's centralized with Block One, with Steemit Incorporated, with the Bitcoin Foundation, the Ethereum Foundation, or whoever controls the repo, and can convince people to push out code, that's another point of centralization potentially. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just chiming in with about the word autonomous, and I think it's interesting because one of the definitions is more about just like self-sovereignty, and then there's another one that's more related to automated or automation. So I don't know what Dan, when he coined the term DAC, he was one of the original ones to do that, what was in his head. And then Vitalik, it seems, when he discussed the DAO, it was like, this futuristic kind of Skynet, everything's automated kind of system. So I think it could be either, but I just wanted to throw that out there. So.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, in that having self-sovereignty doesn't necessarily mean it's autonomous, right? Like automated in terms of, but I think as AI and machine learning and all these things become more ubiquitous and more, part of our everyday lives, I think that there's going to be kind of a merging of those, right? Like I think we're going to have the ability to have self-sovereignty if we can have a trusted, super intelligent system that is open source and auditable, and we can look at it and see, is this doing what we think it's going to do, in a way that isn't controlled by central authorities such as nation state governments, which generally have a monopoly on the use of power and violent threats and currency creation and all these other things. So I think they kind of go hand in hand if they're done right, or we create something pretty dangerous that could end our species. So there's that risk as well.
Hey, Luke, I have a question, because right now the main topic on EOS I'm focused on is kind of the referendum, and how to just garner consensus on that. So I was wondering, within eosDAC itself, you have a constitution, you have code. How is it the custodians that would then decide to make a change and they would campaign on that change? Or is there a referendum mechanism that you guys have employed?
Not currently. So not currently. There isn't a referendum that token holders themselves directly could actually do anything. And the interesting thing about, and I was thinking about this as far as referendum, had a discussion with someone last week about how, they're very concerned about who could submit a referendum for voting on, and whether or not it was just constrained to the block producers. And when I brought up the point that any kind of actual change that was going to make a difference would actually have to include like a pull request, for example. Like if we're talking about something that's, you could say, I want this to happen. Okay, great. But nothing's going to happen unless you actually change the code to implement what it is you're talking about. So pretty much everything requires some type of change. And whether it's even just changing some text of regarding contracts or constitution, whatever it is, there has to be some kind of code pull request of some kind. And that kind of brought up the question of, then ultimately, it's up to the block producers to sign in that code change, right? So ultimately, it almost falls back on them anyway. And if token holders don't like it, they vote them out. So DPoS already kind of has a mechanism for the token holders to have their voices heard on chain. But I wrote a post a while back about how the EOS Constitution is not a contract. It was just, we didn't get to sit down and voluntarily agree to it in order to have access. We kind of assume that everyone agrees to it because they use it, and it's like, it's a little bit squishy to me. And so it's a little bit harder to hold people accountable to something that they didn't voluntarily, directly, officially agree to. And so one of the ideas I was exploring a while back is just forcing everyone to be like, hey, read the terms of service basically and click yes, and then storing that on the chain. Again, is exactly what we're doing with the eosDAC, because we feel that's really important. But as far as, so that's where I look at a referendum would be helpful, to kind of just say like, hey, we as token holders, members, are agreeing to this. And obviously the next question that comes up always is like, well, how do you get the bad actors to, they're not going to agree. So do you just prevent them from using the chain? How do you do that? All that gets very complicated. But I guess I would like to see a lot of examples of how a referendum can be really useful, and how it would practically be played out in a way that wouldn't be any different than just the block producers agreeing to do what the chain holder, the token holders want anyway.
I mean, the way I see the referendum is useful in EOS is like currently right now, the status of the network with essentially 3% of the tokens, assuming you had 3%, you could veto anything, because you could have basically sock puppet BPs in there, and nothing would pass without your say so. with 3%. So the cool thing about a referendum is you at least need that 15%, and even the largest token holder, B1, doesn't actually have the power to game it. So that's one thing I like about the referendum thresholds.
I like that concept, but I think it also just exposes the real problem. Like, to me, the question behind the question, the underlying issue to me is 25% voter engagement. That's why that number is 3%. If that was 70% voter engagement, like it is on the Steem blockchain, not including the Steem Incorporated stack, because they've kind of agreed not to vote, they could. But if we exclude Steem Incorporated, we exclude Block One, and we just look at the actual everyday token holders, there's 70% engagement on the Steem blockchain. Now they get rewarded by almost like a Rex token. They get rewarded for having Steem power. So they get they basically share dilution protection. They get a little bit of inflation. Their account value goes up slightly, or it doesn't go down, depending on how you look at it, right? Yeah. But on the EOS chain, there isn't anything like that. So essentially, there's people that I've talked to who are just concerned about the security of their system. They don't know cryptocurrency well enough. They're not comfortable with whatever hardware or off-chain paper wallet solutions are available now. So they're kind of like, I'll wait it out. So ultimately, it's like, let's say that does happen. That 3% veto situation might actually be one of the best things for the chain. We might need that to happen before people go, oh, you mean the value of my holdings are going down because everyone's abandoning the chain that I invested millions of dollars in because I haven't gotten off my butt and voted for good block producers, or aren't going to do bad things? I guess it's in my best interest to go vote now, right? So this idea is we need, we need people to be engaged with their tokens to protect their own investment. And part of my perspective on that is, voting, actually getting that 25% number much, much, much higher. Because ultimately, even with a kind of referendum, if you're staked weighted voting, if you're doing it that way, you still have the same problem. If the whales are the only engaged people on the referendum, then you have the exact same problem again. And if you try to solve that with like, well, let's do it per account, one vote, well, now you have a Sybil attack problem. And that's not easily solvable either. So I keep kind of pushing that same narrative. Increase voter engagement, because that is the number one problem that we have with these governance issues. If we don't have a wide distribution of voter engagement, then we see these problems. And to your question, June, yeah, it is 70% voter engagement. I haven't done this month's, but every month I run a report. I use Steem SQL and pull that all out. I've been so busy, and the Steem blockchain's had some issues the last week or two, if you haven't noticed. So it's been pretty exciting times for that whole community.
Luke, I'm curious, how did we get the 70%? Like, what methods does Steem use to get such a high voter turnout rate? That's impressive. I think 70%. Yeah, we should be doing the same thing.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it relates to Steem being a social media platform. So essentially, all the witnesses are campaigning on the actual platform itself all the time, talking about, here's what I did, here's what I'm doing, here's the value I'm creating. Hey, did you know you should vote for witnesses? And so there's continual education actually using the technology to let you know what a witness is and what voting for a witness means. There's none of that on EOS. I go use EOS Nights. There's very little in there. There's no nag screen saying, hey, this is free, you could use it, but you should go vote for example, the block producers that are providing a full node for us. That would be a great example for EOS Nights as an example to, encourage more engagement with, token holders to vote for block producers. So I think just, there's been talk about Steem It 2 or whatever the hell you want to call it. It's just more social media tools built on top of EOS that will probably improve voter engagement, I would hope. But it's an excellent question. I think if we can solve that question, we can solve some of these problems.
Yeah, there's no multi-million-dollar funds that hold Steem, or maybe there is, but I think there's more who hold EOS, and they just view it as investment. They might not even know that the community is begging for their participation. They might just.
So do you know any multi-million-dollar fund owners? Like, let's start these conversations. Right. I think you're exactly right, though. Yeah.
Yeah, and it would be cool to see Rex, because I think Rex helps a lot. I think the combination of Rex and more proxies helps, because it just really makes it easy for the token holder. They want their return, but they don't necessarily have to do all the due diligence. I think that's a lot to ask of the average token holder. If they had a proxy, they could just say, oh, this, I trust Luke Stokes. He does great work. Whoever he's voting for, I'll vote for. I think that really does help with voter engagement. The kind of irony is, to get Rex passed, we most likely need a referendum, which is just, there's a lot of kind of like referendum loops. It's like to change Article 11 that dictates how a referendum passes, you need a referendum. Like, there's a lot of stuff like that.
And then you need a constitution that's actually been ratified via a referendum, right? To even,
Right.
yeah. So I had that same conversation with someone recently about what requires, like, for example, if we adjust it from 30 votes to 50, does that require a referendum? Or is that just a better implementation of the type of voting that we initially intended?
Right.
These are interesting questions.
And even that line isn't that clear. What requires a referendum? I believe that Rex does, because it touches the RAM savings fee, and I think anything that touches that needs complete. That's not up to the block producer's discretion. Otherwise, they could just say, "Hey, the top 21 should get all the RAM fees," and then it's a unanimous decision, perhaps. So I think it makes sense that the token holders would have to decide anything that touches that. But yeah, it really is like a where do you start problem.
Yeah, I'll chime in with that too. I think it definitely should be explicit in the Constitution, all the system parameters, and especially, I mean, the Rex is creating new tokens, right? So anything significant to the entire blockchain should be explicit in the Constitution, and that's kind of what I've actually been trying to work on, just to outline everything in terms of the inflation, the even compensation, all of that are significant, and then if you do want to change it, you essentially would have to amend the Constitution. So, but it makes everything clear, explicit, and so I think there's this danger that we're just going to be upgrading these based on what I guess the core developers want. But I would say anything significant, if it's a bug fix, it's okay, right? We don't have to worry about that. But anything that's not explicit in the Constitution, you can, I think you have to actually add to for it to be, legitimate in my mind. So that's why that's the only kind of area that I wanted to kind of contribute for the Constitution, just having all of this written out so that we can decide which ones require a referenda or not. So, and which ones don't. So,
and the challenge with that, though, to even say that it requires a referendum, it also requires the block producers to agree, right? Otherwise, you have to vote them out and vote in block producers who will implement the code change anyway. So it's kind of, it's kind of interesting to think about it from that standpoint, because you still have to get the block producers to be like, yes, this is what we want to do. So if they're already agreeing to do that, then what did the referendum actually do other than signal to the block producers, this is what we want you to do, which is fantastic. But that's kind of supposed to also be what DPoS is supposed to do, right? That's what's failing right now. We don't have enough people saying, hey, who are these new block producers that we don't know about that kind of all of a sudden are in the top 20 that haven't been really adding value this whole time? Something fishy about maybe the way they're being voted in, who knows? There's nobody really cares, right? So if those 75% of the people that aren't voting today do care, then they could actually come in and say, yeah, we're going to actually vote for some other people we think are providing more value. And then those people, they won't be block producers. But again, I don't know all these new block producers. I hear people frustrated about it, but maybe they are excellent technically. Maybe they are providing great value. I don't see it personally yet as a proxy. I'm not going to vote for them. So, that and maybe that's the question. We start asking who is voting for them and why, and then getting these stories told to talk through just more voter engagement using DPoS, right? If DPoS is used, it works. I think the problem we're seeing right now is it's not being used as effectively as it could because we don't have enough voter engagement.
I'm curious, what would you guys think about, I don't know, maybe you could give me some pros and cons, a situation where we allocated a small amount of percentage to voters who vote 30 block producers. So like give them an incentivization to actually vote for block producers and maybe referendum contracts as well.
So Justin,
what are some of the pros and cons?
So the Rex proposal actually it does that, where it qualifies people who will be able to earn from Rex. I think they have to vote for 20 block producers before they get the proceeds. That was the original design with Rex. So maybe that will work.
I guess so.
And there was an airdrop yesterday on people based on how many they voted for, which was kind of funny. So like I forgot what it was called. Oh shoot, I'm drawing blank. But there was a Patrios, I think is the token, and so that happened yesterday. The challenge with that, any form of incentivizing the actual. Now, obviously, we don't want vote buying. I think NEX did a fantastic post about that, really breaking down why any form of financial incentivization or any kind of incentivization for specifically for voting outcome is really bad. But even just encouraging any voting activity at all is an interesting challenge, because you could also increase the noise and not the signal, where someone's like, well, I just want my reward. I'm not going to put in any effort to actually pick a good proxy or pick some good. I just go through top 30, top 50, whatever I need to vote for, boom. And I'm just, I have no idea. Now, the only way that I think we could combat that would be to have those people, again, have some type of reputation or identity so that their buddies can be like, dude, what are you doing? Don't vote for that guy. These guys are scammers, or whatever, right? So until we have that kind of social capital part of our capital system that we're describing, where there's reputation and identity and people are willing to put themselves out there, but I just don't know that that'll even ever happen on EOS as it's designed. You can be anonymous on EOS. That's most blockchains have that type of functionality. So, I mean, maybe that'll be part of DAC chain. Maybe identity and reputation would be a big part of it.
Yeah, definitely think identity and reputation is the way to go. It's somewhat of a holy grail. I'll go back to your comment about vote buying, and I know this is controversial, especially in this time of day, but I think vote buying is actually could be a good thing. And there was this piece written, and Thomas Cox actually is the one who gave the link on the governance Telegram channel, and I think it was the calculus of consensus is I think the title, by James Buchanan. He's an economist, and if I just read the wiki link, and at the end it was almost suggesting that vote buying is like optimal, like an optimal strategy for, and that's what essentially makes the most sense, in
what was
the
it
end.
called
like,
again?
and this
I
is
actually want to look into this. What was it called again?
Public, like like this is regular, like a non kind of corporate kind of voting. This is for just kind of public policy. And so,
what was it called again? I want to take a look at that, because most thanks for the link. Like most governments outlaw it. Like they're straight up saying,
yeah, exactly. There's definitely a stigma for it, and in corporate governance, it's fine. You can vote by in corporate governance. It's only in public, kind of in the public arena, where it's there's a huge stigma behind it. And I'm trying to figure out exactly why, because economically it actually makes sense if you can, it's more efficient to just sell your vote, and it's better. And essentially what you're doing is you're voting for politicians to essentially give you what you want, right? So in the end, that's what's happening anyways, indirectly. It's not like
it does happen in
things, right?
Well, I was gonna say, I agree with you. Like, it does happen rather indirectly. Like, you'll see unions or a voting block will have like, if there's in nations where the farmers are a large part of the population, there'll be a subsidy for farmers, and in nations where they're not, there won't be, but there'll be a subsidy for whoever is the large voting block. It's not vote buying per se, but it really is. Like, you see very little subsidies for people under the age of 18. It kind of makes sense. Like, their vote, they don't have a vote, so they don't have a voice. So like it happens, but it happens in the Western world. It happens in our democracies. It's just a little, there's a few layers in between. But it effectively does kind of amount to having an incentive for your vote.
That's a really interesting discussion point, because I've been talking about this a little bit recently, and even in the beginning when EOS first launched, there was some discussion about why is it so bad? Some communities saying rewarding people for voting maybe isn't a bad thing, and so that's why it's interesting that we're even at that low level of this discussion. We're still trying to figure out what the community agrees is good and bad. Once we can figure that out, then we can actually start taking steps to enforce it. But if we're not even in agreement there, we got a lot of work still left to do.
Oops. Sorry, I want to share a link here to this video. It's very amusing. I don't know if you guys know CPC Gray. The YouTuber?
Justin just asked a really good question. Do any of the vote buying mechanisms you are all discussing include collusion, though? I think collusion is a really important thing to consider on DPoS specifically, is that you need to have this independence. You need to have independent block producers independently making their own decisions, supported by the token holders and their constituents. If you don't have that, then what's the point? Let's just all have a private AWS database, right? Like, it's the whole point of DPoS is governance that's decentralized.
Right. Yeah, and I agree with that. It's a separate issue, though. Collusion is more about independent, like the independence of block producers, and so it's I think it's a separate topic, which is important to try to. I think that's a bigger maybe problem, or just for security. We just want to limit collusion more so than vote buying, in my opinion, because I was always thinking vote buying was actually a more efficient way to do things. I never was so
I would say definitely check out
and discuss this like out in the open as much, but
check out NEX's post about that, because I do really think he does a great job of breaking down from a kind of fundamental maths, and he gets a little complicated with the math, but just breaking down like almost a proof of why it always essentially leads to collusion. The idea being that if you accept vote buying, you ultimately every time get collusion. It's just this inevitable path. And that's what he kind of argues. And I don't know that he's wrong, but again, I want to read the counterpoint that you brought up as far as calculus of consent. It sounds very interesting. And there might be a nuance that they add that makes that not happen, but I'd be very surprised if that was the case.
And it's a different kind of collusion, the vote buying act. And I think that's what he's talking about. But there's separate kinds of collusion. There's a collusion for either trying to wreck the network and things like that, or like the collusion is really like you're just negotiating with people to vote buy, and you're kind of going back and forth and exchanging votes, right? And that's the idea of it. And that's true. There is, but the purpose is different, right? Like you're just doing it just to get elected and not to colluding against the system. So anyway, so it is interesting. I do agree with that. Like, yeah, like there is this natural like cooperation you need to vote by, like an exchange votes. So that. Well,
it also, I think the negative side of it is that you start incentivizing something opposite to what the purpose was, right? The purpose is to be technically excellent block producers. The purpose is to provide value to the community. The purpose is to do these amazing things to protect your investment as an EOS token holder. That's the goal of voting in great block producers. As soon as you create new motivations outside of that goal, you distort the goal. That's kind of the summary of it. It's like, oh, I could vote for this guy who's fantastic. I could vote for eosDAC, who's doing an amazing job, and you guys are all excited about what we're pioneering, but we're in 30th position. They don't get a reward for voting for eosDAC necessarily, right? So these are some of the calculus that people may play out. And so, well, if I vote for this guy and I'm part of some vote buying collusion type system, well, I get money. And money's nice. I get to buy pretty things, whatever. So these are challenging things. And again, these are all allegations. I don't have any evidence hard that I can point to what's actually going on. But.
I'll throw in another controversial point. I would say the block producer pay is probably thought to be kind of a premium right now. And what happens is that if that was lower, then there will be less incentive to vote by, right? So I think what people are thinking is that if they, really just run the network, that's, really what the main point of it is, as long as they're producing blocks, right? And then the idea is that there's any premium that would be what the vote buying is for. Otherwise, there would be no incentive to vote buy if it was pretty much a market kind of based system where it's like the cost and the price is at least relatively close, right?
Yeah, I think that the counter argument to that is we want to attract the very best people on the planet for doing this job. And you can't do that if it's commoditied. If it's just like race to the bottom, whoever is willing to do it for the cheapest price, you will not get the best people. You will not get the best infrastructure. You will not get the best hardware, the best DevOps people, the best security personnel. It's just not going to happen. And so that's where I think that DPoS is designed to be a prize that's sought after and fought for, to be like, man, I want that money, and I want not only that, I want to do good things in the world with that money. Like I I could be making a lot of money if I was at a different centralized, block producer. I'm here because I believe in DACs and I want to support this idea. It's not about the money for me, but I'm in a place financially where that's a little bit more of a reality than most people. So, and I'm not like well off or anything, but it's just I can at least get by to focus on my passions, right? So it's just I want to keep it high enough that there is a goal to become a block producer from people who could make lots of money doing other things in other places.
The way
you're right.
Yeah, and I don't doubt that the most talented people are actually doing the block production, but I think the incentives are there to make that happen. And so I think it's just like this balance, like this, like, you're the two extremes. Like you get the most talented people, but what is the kind of the reality of block production, right? And so people are seeing that as an opportunity. So what do you do? And I have a feeling that there is a significant premium, enough so that they're kind of doing these things at the detriment of the network to make that happen, right? And they just understand like, hey, we can do a good job like producing blocks just as well. And so, but if you minimize that incentive, I would assume that it would be less. There'll be just less of these issues coming up. But again, I just want to throw that out there as an opinion here. So
the way I used to,
for me,
go ahead, Justin.
Like I know you go first.
Well, I was just going to say that the way I used to explain the game theory of the block producer to non-crypto people or non-DPoS people was like, it's a lucrative position that is really hard to attain and really easy to lose. That's kind of how I explained why the game theory worked, why no one would ever shoot themselves in the foot. I think the really easy to lose part we're not seeing, and I think that's the voter engagement that we kind of already touched on. But I think it does need to be lucrative enough that people like seek it out. But also, if you were a whale and you had enough tokens to control every paid position, so from 1 to 70, you're only getting 1%. Well, I guess you're getting 1% of the whole network, but like it's not that lucrative to game the whole system. And like a lot of this talk about people doing it for the money isn't like the money it takes to game the system makes the ROI rather low. Or it would if we had higher engagement. I think at around, if you can do it all with 3%, maybe it makes a little more sense.
Yeah, and if you're getting rewarded that
annual rate of a block producer right now, what's the number? Anyone?
It depends on the number. I think they're making 800 a day in like the top slots. I'd have to go check one sec.
That's about right. Yeah.
So what's the annual run rate? Or what's the annual? See, 1.5 million is not a lot if that's that. I thought it was higher than that, significantly.
No, that's about right with the current token price.
Okay.
It was a lot more.
It's a lot of money to me, man. Jeez.
Okay. Yeah. 1.5 million is actually not that bad, but still, like, it's like even like it was, imagine it was like just a few months ago or a couple months ago, that was like 5 million or 7 million or whatever, right? So that's a pretty good chunk of change for operating. So
it's an interesting way to think about it too. And again, I don't think this is reality because the whole cryptocurrency market moves together. But one way to think about this in the future, if the cryptocurrency market starts to independently act, like where EOS could survive Bitcoin going up and down or whatever, is that getting investors to think about actions of their own that would change something from being worth 1.5 million to be worth 5 million. Like thinking in terms of that paradigm, I think is so important. And I really hope we get more and more people that are not speculators, but actually investors to recognize like, oh, if I'm thinking about EOS as like the AWS of blockchain technology, this service provider that everybody wants to go and use if they're going to build all these Silicon Valley blockchain apps, then maybe I would think a little differently about how I want to protect my investment and how I want to protect that chain and make sure that these are the best, excellent technical people on the planet running this thing. And so it's an interesting way to think about the dynamics of value, and that it's not just how much money can I extract this week? It's about, okay, great, you got X number of tokens, but what if you did something different that made those tokens 10 times more valuable? You would be okay not getting those tokens because the ones you already have would have been worth so much more, right? So it's a different way to think about the dynamics of this.
Yeah, I think the reality is, for the most part, people the more those block rewards are, the more expectation people have of what you do with it. I think, yeah, if people are barely making do with the amount of block rewards they're getting, they're literally only able to run the hardware and that's all, then that's all they'll do to add value to the system. But, if there's a lot more money and incentive in it, they'll naturally have to compete by, marketing the system better, providing better user education, having better security. The expectations are incrementally higher for what the block rewards are. So I don't feel like it's a significant problem at the moment.
Cool. So we're 15 past like an hour 15 into this. So I guess is there anything maybe urgent you guys want to talk about, and if not, we can maybe try to wrap up in the next 5-10 minutes, I guess. So
yeah, I was just gonna say I got to get going, but I've fully enjoyed this conversation, and thank you also for providing input to our specific issue with like staking tokens and all that. If you want to join our Discord and continue it, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I've really enjoyed the convo. This has been great.
Yeah, this has been awesome. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, great. No, yeah, that's fantastic. Joining in and being a guest and just being, hopefully you guys will come back as regulars. I just want to do this every week. So I guess if no one else has any questions, we could just kind of wrap it up and just hope to see each other next week.
All right, cool. Thanks again for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Yeah, cool.
All right, have a great week, guys. See you next time.
Take care.
Cheers, guys.
All right,
see you guys.